Hello and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Amanda Bowen. I'm so happy you could join us today. As always, at the bottom of your screen, you've got your best ways to get a hold of us or get a hold of the latest forecast if you can't make our TV show. There's the 1-800 number, 1-800-472-0391. That's where you can get a forecast for your general area 24 hours a day. You can also visit us online if you have internet access at weather.gov/Alaska for a more specific forecast. And if you ever have any comments or feedback for us or questions, please feel free to email us anytime at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. We don't have any particularly hazardous weather over the next couple of days, so we are going to go right into our satellite imagery, on which we can see a low pressure system spinning just off the panhandle. We can see that counterclockwise motion there with clouds spreading across the panhandle. Not a whole lot going on elsewhere across the state. There's a little bit of a spin also in the vicinity of the Aleutians with some weak low pressure there as well. Looking at our surface chart, we see just that. We've got our strongest low pressure system just south of the panhandle there at 987 millibars, and that's bringing some rain and snow showers into much of the panhandle today. And then in the Aleutians, we have our next strongest low pressure system at 992 millibars, centered there right in the central Aleutians. That's also going to be bringing some rain showers to the Aleutians, as well as possibly some snow to the southern Alaska Peninsula. We also have weak low pressure centered over the northern Gulf. That's going to be bringing moisture into the south central area, although we don't expect any precipitation to reach the ground quite today. We're also going to see some light snow showers today along the north slope, as well as the eastern Brooks Range and down into the interior. Finally, some light snow showers also right along the immediate west coast, particularly from about Point Hope down across the western Seward Peninsula and into the Yukon Delta. Also keep an eye out for freezing spray if you have any plans to be out in the Chukchi Sea or really much of the Bering Sea down near the coastline. For tonight, not a whole lot of change. We've got showers, mostly snow showers, still continuing for the panhandle, maybe starting to taper off a little bit. Some snow showers starting to develop in the Prince William Sound area, as well as the eastern Kenai Peninsula. Snow, light snow continuing for the Alaska Peninsula with that weak low pressure system moving just south of the Aleutians. As we head into Wednesday, we do finally see some of that precipitation starting to push up into south central and the eastern Alaska Peninsula, with snow and snow showers in that area. Some snow showers also developing again right along the northern panhandle. And we'll see some light snow develop also for the north slope down through the Brooks Range and down to about the Yukon River across the interior. Another threat for freezing spray both in the Chukchi Sea as well as down near the Kuskokwim Delta and around Nunivak Island on Wednesday as well. For Thursday, we have a stronger low pressure system moving up into the Gulf. That's going to be bringing plenty of precipitation into the panhandle for Thursday, with mostly rain showers for the southwestern panhandle and snow for the northern panhandle, as well as the higher terrain. We'll also see some more snow developing across the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, and into south central and the Matsu, spreading northward all the way up to the Alaska Range for Thursday. Well, along with that low pressure system, we're expecting some windy conditions across the panhandle, with winds picking up also just a little bit, not as much in the northern Gulf Coast area. Getting into our temperatures for Wednesday morning, pretty mild for the southern panhandle, mid-30s there. Cooler certainly for the northern panhandles in the 20s, and then we've got cooler temperatures even than that across the northern Gulf, with 19 there in Seward, 14 at Anchorage, single digits up in the Mat-Su with 3 degrees there at Talkeetna. Wednesday afternoon, warming a little bit into the 40s for the southern panhandle, 30s for the northern panhandle, and just 20s or even teens for much of the south central and Mat-Su area. We've got our one of our cold spots there, just a high temperature of 6 degrees there at Golconda on Wednesday afternoon. Thursday morning, cool again across the northern Gulf Coast and south central and Mat-Su areas. 16 for Talkeetna expected on Thursday morning, 0 degrees there at Golconda, 25 at Valdez. We do have 20s also for the northern panhandle and 30s for the southern panhandle with 34 there at Sitka. Finally, for Thursday afternoon, a little bit warmer across the board. We've got 30s and 40s for the panhandle. We've got 20s and 30s for the North Gulf Coast and South Central areas, and then still rather chilly across Southwest and the Southwest interior with single digits there, 6 degrees there at McGrath. Shifting to the northern part of the state for Wednesday morning, a seasonably cold morning with temperatures across the interior generally in the single digits to teens in the negative. We've got some single digits positive to teens positive on the north slope, and then anywhere from single digits to positive teens on the west coast. Looks like our cold spot there is going to be Anaktuvuk Pass at -16. Wednesday afternoon, just a little bit of warming, at least most areas getting into the positives at least. Across the interior, we're looking at 7 for Fairbanks. We've got 0 degrees for a high Wednesday afternoon at Arctic Village, and it looks like 15 at Utqiagvik Wednesday afternoon. Thursday morning, a little bit cooler than Wednesday morning for most areas. We're looking at single digits across the north slope with 6 degrees there at Kaktovik. For the west coast, pretty similar to Wednesday morning, 8 degrees there at Shishmaref, 21 our warm spot at Savunga. And then across the interior, mostly single digits negatives, again with -5 there at Fairbanks and -9 at Tanana. Thursday afternoon, we see another cool day, cold day really. Plenty of places looking at a high of 0 degrees or even negatives Thursday afternoon. We've got 0 degrees for a high at Bettles, -6 there at Ambler. Our warm spots are going to be the coasts as usual. We've got 16 at Utqiagvik and 20 at Wales for Thursday afternoon. Shifting to the southwest portion of the state for Wednesday morning, we've got negatives across much of the interior southwest, with -2 there at Bethel. Warming as usual as we head down the Alaska Peninsula and into the Aleutians. We've got 35 degrees there at Unalaska for a low temperature on Wednesday morning. And heading into Wednesday afternoon, single digits, still a cold day for the interior southwest with just 4 degrees there at McGrath for Wednesday afternoon. Warming for the Alaska Peninsula with 15 there at Dillingham, 19 at King Salmon. We've got almost 40 degrees for Kodiak, and that trend continuing as we head down into the Aleutians. For Thursday morning, another chilly morning across the southwest interior, but not quite as chilly as Wednesday morning. So we've got -6 at Bethel, but warmer along the coast and out in the Bering with 15 there at Makoriuk. And temperatures right around freezing for the eastern Aleutians with 20s for the southern Alaska Peninsula. Thursday afternoon, quite chilly with high temperatures in the single digits across the interior. Once again, we got 6 degrees, one of our cold spots there at McGrath, 13 for Dillingham on Thursday afternoon, but warming quickly with that marine influence as we head down the Alaska Peninsula. 34 degrees there near Sand Point and Chignac. And I wanted to take a look at Our climate outlooks for week 2, so this is days 8 through 14 for temperatures. This is going to be for the period November 17th through November 23rd. So essentially we're looking at next week. Now this isn't looking at specific temperatures, but rather how the areas might compare with normal. So we're looking at a greater than 50% chance of seeing cooler than usual conditions across southwest portions of the state for that period. In fact, most of the state looking at cooler than usual, favoring cooler than usual temperatures, except north of Fairbanks up to the North Slope, favoring more normal temperatures for this week 2 period. And then looking at the same period for precipitation, most of the state favoring below normal precipitation, with that bullseye kind of from Bethel all the way up to about Kotzebue along the west coast, greater than a 50 or even 60% chance of below normal precipitation for this period. We do have a small area along the Panhandle from Juneau down to Ketchikan with chances favoring above normal precipitation.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to a look at your aviation forecast, starting with flying weather on Wednesday morning. Mostly VFR conditions really across the mainland, just some MVFR conditions for the North Slope and the north side of Seward Peninsula on Wednesday morning. We do have more MVFR conditions across the Gulf Coast as well as the Panhandle, with some IFR conditions in the central Panhandle as well as the southern Alaska Peninsula for Wednesday morning. Wednesday afternoon, pretty similar, mostly VFR conditions, but we do still have some lingering MVFR conditions in the Bering Strait area as well as the North Slope. And those MVFR conditions along the Gulf Coast are going to spread a little bit further inland into South Central as well as the Bristol Bay area. Thursday morning, those MVFR conditions across the northern Gulf Coast, spreading even a little bit further inland all the way up through the Alaska Range. Also MVFR conditions spreading into the Brooks Range from the North Slope. VFR conditions in the Panhandle though, but continuing MVFR conditions for much of the Alaska Peninsula. And Thursday afternoon, we have some improvement along the Gulf Coast, particularly in the southeast mainland and very northern Panhandle area around Yakutat. Those areas are expected to be VFR on Thursday afternoon. Still MVFR all the way from Prince William Sound down the Alaska Peninsula across Kodiak Island and out through the western Aleutians. Also more MVFR developing along much of the west coast as well as the North Slope and Brooks Range, even some IFR developing through much of the North Slope on Thursday afternoon. Past conditions on Wednesday, we're seeing a lot of VFR conditions. So VFR at Anaktuvuk Pass, VFR at Adigan Pass on Wednesday. We will see MVFR conditions at Lake Clark Pass on Wednesday, and VFR in the morning, but deteriorating to MVFR Wednesday afternoon at Merrill Pass. But VFR at Rainy and Windy Passes, also VFR at Isabel Pass and Mentasta Pass. Tanita Pass starting the day Wednesday morning at VFR, but deteriorating some to MVFR on Wednesday afternoon. Portage Pass, same story. VFR at Portage Pass Wednesday morning, deteriorating to MVFR on Wednesday afternoon. And both Chilkoot and White Passes expected to be MVFR that should be, through the day on Wednesday. Taking a look at our freezing levels, we have hit the cold season. So mostly we just have our surface freezing level going all the way from the central Bering across the southern Alaska Peninsula out into the Gulf and into the southern Panhandle. A small area of a little bit warmer air with freezing levels around 2,000 feet, impacting just the most southwestern portion of the Panhandle for Wednesday morning. Icing on Wednesday, mostly just the Gulf Coast areas where we're going to be having some precipitation. So icing, isolated moderate icing along the Gulf Coast from the Panhandle all the way up through Prince William Sound and South Central and out through the Alaska Peninsula. That's going to be isolated moderate icing between about 2,000 and 6,000 feet on Wednesday. For our jet stream on Wednesday, main jet not over Alaska at all. We have one jet streak stretching from eastern Russia southward into the western Bering and across the western Aleutians, that one peaking at about 115 knots out of the north. And then our main jet coming up out of the southwest and into the British Columbia coast and northwestern Washington, that one peaking out of the west and southwest at about 130 knots. At 9,000 feet, we're looking at some increased winds across the west coast, peaking out of the north around 40 miles an hour, also peaking about 40 knots, that should be, about 45 knots out of the southwest across the Kodiak Island and eastern Alaska Peninsula areas, about 30 knots out of the southwest across the northern panhandle as well. At 3,000 feet, we have a weak low over southwestern Alaska, over the northern panhandle. Our main winds are out over the Aleutians, but even then we're looking at maybe 30 knots of wind out of the northeast. And then our strongest winds are associated with a front that's still well south of the panhandle out in the Gulf or northeastern Pacific. And finally, for turbulence on Wednesday, we've got a few spots of considerable moderate turbulence. We've got the Chukchi Sea coast as well as the western interior, both expected to be considerable moderate turbulence below about 4,000 feet. An area of the eastern Alaska Peninsula and portions of Kodiak Island, also considerable moderate below 4,000 feet, and the western Aleutians.
So the sun, looking here from the ground, seems very constant and quiet. But actually, when we look at it from space, we can see it's quite turbulent and active. Space weather is activity on the sun and in the near-Earth space that can affect our technological infrastructure and society. The sun is constantly spewing out a stream of particles called the solar wind that goes out into the solar system. And it affects us here near Earth, where we're protected by a magnetic field. The interaction between the solar wind and the magnetic field can cause space weather. The Carrington event is the largest storm we've seen in recorded history when we're looking at space weather. But every solar cycle, which repeats about every 11 years, one estimate estimates that there's a 10% chance of getting a large storm like the Carrington event that could impact us here on Earth. But we see solar storms almost all the time. And these storms have an effect on our technological infrastructure. Solar storms can cause activity in Earth's atmosphere and magnetosphere that can damage electrical power grids that power our communities, interrupt radio and satellite communications, and can cause our GPS navigation to fail. NOAA is working with its international partners to ensure that we have different vantage points where we can observe space weather. Our space weather observing infrastructure from space includes the NOAA Discover satellite and the NASA ACE satellite that are stationed upstream of Earth to give us a first buoy measurement of the solar wind. It also includes the ESA-NASA SOHO satellite and the NASA Stereo satellite that image the sun and also make coronagraph measurements of the outer atmosphere of the sun, the corona, that can tell us when large explosions happen off the sun. We also observe the sun and the Earth's magnetic field from the geostationary location with NOAA's GOES. So the way we use the space weather information from satellites and from the ground is to be able to make forecasts and predictions, just like we do with hurricanes and terrestrial weather. We observe the sun and look for activity and see how it develops, and see if it's going to culminate into a large explosion that can affect us here on Earth. NOAA is working with its international partners to expand our observing capability. We're committed to observing along the Sun-Earth line. So we're going to do the imaging of the sun and the upstream buoy measurements of the solar wind along the Sun-Earth axis. more we understand about the sun, the more we can prepare for it and become, just like we are a weather-ready nation, become a space weather-ready nation. And as we look forward to humans exploring out into the solar system and advancing our space commerce activities, space weather becomes more and more important.
Here at the Space Weather Prediction Center, we monitor space activity as it's occurring back at the sun, and then we issue out a forecast as well as alerts, watches, and warnings as activity is occurring. A typical space weather event would start with a solar flare back at the sun. That solar flare is short-lived and produces fairly short-lived impacts as well, basically impacting communications on the daylit side of the Earth. However, some solar flares are also associated with a coronal mass ejection or an eruption of plasma that's blasted off the sun and out into space. As forecasters, it's our job to determine if that cloud of plasma is moving towards Earth, and if it comes towards Earth, what the potential impacts may be. Those impacts can range from a fairly low-level storm that may produce the aurora a little bit farther south than usual, or can range up into fairly significant magnetic disturbances that don't happen very often, but when they do, they can impact technologies and infrastructure here on Earth. We provide information to lots of different user groups, from airlines to the electric power grid, to emergency managers, aviation, satellite community, lots of different customers.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And welcome back for a look at your marine forecast. We'll start with the look at the sea ice edge today. As we've been seeing, there's more ice than usual for this time of year in the southern Chukchi Sea. In fact, that area seems to be at least a month ahead of schedule as far as ice coverage. We're also continuing to see more ice coverage along the west coast, and we have ice coverage all the way from Norton Bay down to Kuskokwim Bay. So there's really quite a lot of ice forming along the west coast. We are not seeing anything quite in Cook Inlet yet, but we do expect to continue to see another few days of especially cold temperatures in South Central, so we'll keep an eye for if there's any new ice formation there. Taking a look at our marine forecast starting Wednesday for the eastern Gulf and southeastern Alaska. For Wednesday, we're looking at winds generally out of the south to southeast around 15 knots. Seas in the Gulf 6 to 7 feet with 3 feet across the inside waterways. That's going to change rapidly as we head into Thursday. We have a strong low pressure system that's going to be approaching. So we're going to see gale force winds in the Gulf developing on Thursday out of the east and southeast to 35 to 40 knots. And then even across the inside waterways, we're looking at more northerly winds at 20 to 35 knots with Lynn Canal gusts up to about 55 knots. So quite strong winds and quickly changing winds and seas on Thursday with that low pressure system approaching. Heading across into South Central on Wednesday, we've got fairly light conditions, winds 10 to 20 knots generally out of the south for the Gulf area and out of the north across Cook Inlet. Seas 5 to 7 feet for the Gulf, 3 feet in Prince William Sound. And as we head into Thursday, we'll see a little bit of a change, but not nearly as much as we're seeing with the impacts across southeast. We've got winds increasing out of the east across the Gulf to 20 to 25 knots with still some northerly flow for Cook Inlet. Seas coming up just a little bit to 6 to 9 feet. As we head across to the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas on Wednesday, winds anywhere from 15 to about 25 knots. that wind direction is generally going to be out of the north on the Bering Sea side of the peninsula, with a little bit more southerly flow on the Gulf side. And as we head into Thursday, winds and seas picking up just a little bit there as well, 20 to 30 knots with a more consistent northwesterly flow, with seas as high as about 9 feet. Wednesday, for the Aleutian chain, we're looking at winds 25 to 30 knots, with winds generally out of the north and northeast, seas anywhere from about 9 to 12 feet. And headed into Thursday, we see the opposite trend, with winds and seas actually coming down a bit. Winds 15 to 25 knots, still generally out of the north, and seas dropping to anywhere from 5 to about 8 feet. For the west coast on Wednesday, we've got generally northerly flow, bringing that colder air into the area. Winds 15 to 20 knots and seas 3 to 5 feet. And then on Thursday, we'll see a little bit of an increase in the winds across the open Bering to 20 to 25 knots. Still looking at northerly flow though, seas coming up to about 6 feet. For the Arctic coast, the North Slope is going to be seeing easterly flow on Wednesday, about 20 knots, and 20 to 25 knots out of the east for the Chukchi Sea, with the highest winds right there off of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope. Lighter winds through the Bering Strait out of the north and northeast, about 10 knots. And heading into Thursday, still 20-knot winds for the North Slope, but switching to more out of the north. We've got decreasing winds across the Chukchi to about 15 knots, still out of the northeast. To recap what we're looking at for the next couple of days, Wednesday is going to be a relatively calm day with just some light snow showers over the northern Gulf Coast, as well as some light snow for the North Slope and eastern interior. As we head into Thursday is when we're going to see that quickly deteriorating conditions, especially for the Panhandle and the eastern Gulf waters, with that strong low pressure system expected to be about 979 millibars in the central Gulf. And then as that low continues to move further north, we'll see some of those impacts starting to come into the northern Gulf Coast. Thanks so much for watching Alaska TV Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.